Legend has it that the greatest road car ever built, a McLaren F1, was first conceived in an airport lounge of all places. After the 1988 Italian Grand Prix, McLaren's head honchos, Ron Dennis, Mansour Roger, Gordon Murray and Creighton Brown, arrived at the airport to discover that their flight had been delayed, so they started discussing the possibility of McLaren building a road car. As the designer, Murray was adamant that this car needed to be the ultimate driver's car and needed to disrupt the already established supercar hierarchy, such as Porsche and Ferrari. By March 1989, Murray received the green light to go ahead and started to put pencil to paper, using his cutting-edge Formula One knowledge and experience to totally rewrite the supercar rulebook. Every single component on an F1 was both unique and innovative, from the chassis to the engine. The car was launched at the Monaco Grand Prix, and the first customer road car was delivered in December 1992. By 1998, McLaren had produced in total 106 F1s. That consisted of 64 road cars, 6 LMs, 5 experimental prototypes, 3 GTs, 18 short-tail GTRs, and 10 long-tail GTRs. Now, when Murray first designed the F1, thought about the F1, racing wasn't in his mind. The car was never meant to go on the racetrack. But because of the launch of the BPR GT Global Series in 1994 and the pressure that he received from many teams for him to produce a track version, he started to look at it closer. Because an F1 was so innovative and so far ahead of its competitors at the time, Murray had to make very few modifications in order for an F1 to go racing and be competitive. He literally bolted on a great big rear wing. He added a couple of extra cooling ducts. He stripped the interior, making it a 2-seater and not a 3. He removed the leather. He removed the electric windows. He removed the Kenwood radio system. He added a roll cage and removed the rubber bushings from the suspension. What then happened when these GTRs went racing in 1995 has cemented F1's place in automobile folklore forever. They won 6 of the first 7 rounds in the championship. Privateer teams then took some F1s to Le Mans. And not only did an F1 win Le Mans, which was the first time that any manufacturer in the history of that race had ever won on its debut, but an F1 filled 4 of the first 5 places. After its very impressive inaugural season, McLaren faced stiffer competition from the likes of Porsche with their legendary GT1 for 1996. Many improvements and modifications were made to the F1 for the new season, with the most prominent being an extension to the car's front and rear bodywork with a vastly increased front splitter, which added 80 mil to the overall length of the car. The bodywork was also modified to enable it to be removed quicker to deal with repairs in competition. The engine in the car now sat slightly lower, and the height of the front was reduced by 15 mil. More robust and lightweight components were used for the gearbox, with the casing now being constructed from magnesium. All of these weight-saving improvements meant that the car's overall weight was now reduced by 38 kilos. And after what happened in 1995, demand was huge. McLaren received 9 orders for 96 spec GTRs, and 2 95 spec GTRs were also updated. McLaren went on to completely once again dominate the sports car scene in '96. They won 9 races in the BPR GT Global Series plus another championship, and 5 races plus a championship in the very prestigious Japanese series. At the end of the 1996 season, the BPR GT Global Series was reformed into the FIA GT Championship, and the technical regulations slightly altered. Porsche had proven to be very successful with their GT1, and Mercedes-Benz were showing huge potential in testing with their CLK GTR. However, McLaren had also been very busy developing the GTR. McLaren realised that the car needed more downforce, and to do this, they extensively redesigned the whole bodywork. The full bodywork of the car now was completely purpose-built compared to the 95 and 96 cars that were basically a road car with a great big rear wing bolted onto the back. The nose and tail sections were significantly longer, adding 641 mil to the overall length of the car. The rear wing was as wide as permissible. The wheel arches widened. 20-spoke alloy wheels. The X-Track gearbox was removed for a 6-speed sequential box. The car was the lightest of all GTR variants. When JJ Leto first drove the car in '97 without any setup, as soon as he jumped on the track in the car, it was immediately 8 seconds quicker at Monza than the 96 GTR. That is mind-blowing. 8 seconds in 1 lap quicker without any setup. That's how much of an improvement a Longtail was to the short-tail GTRs. These 1997 F1 GTRs are known as Longtails because of their stretched bodywork. The first round of the 97 championship was held at the Hockenheim Ring, where these Longtails came home in first, second and third. They would go on to win 5 of the 11 championship rounds in 1997. They are the quickest of all the F1 GTRs. They are the lightest of all the F1 GTRs, and they only produced 10 examples, so they are the rarest of all the F1 GTRs. They are a very special car. This particular example is chassis 19R. It's the first of only 10 Longtails ever produced, and it was the factory prototype and development car. It's also the last F1 GTR to ever win a major international race, which is quite something to boast. It's now been road converted by Lanzante and Gordon Murray design, and it's UK road registered with EU taxes paid. The colour it's presented in today is the car's original livery, and it's known by everybody at McLaren as squiggles because of the psychedelic accents that are to accentuate the extended bodywork. Now, the car also comes complete, which I want to show you this and share this with you. A fantastic book that has been put together by Gordon Murray Design, which documents the conversion from race to road, and also documents that 19R was the first Longtail GTR to ever be road converted. And you can see from here the extent of the book, which I wouldn't expect anything less from Gordon, to be perfectly honest, but even documenting all of the car's history, its testing, you know, the issues they came up against when they were doing the road conversion, how Lanzante approached them with the program. It's quite fantastic. The car also comes complete with an extensive spares package, including all of the items to convert it back to full race spec, plus all of the bodywork that the car used while racing in the Japanese Championship. When you sit inside this car, you realise what a fantastic job Lanzante done of the restoration and the road conversion. You know, these cars always started life as a pure out-and-out race car, and when you sit inside it today,
It's the same as the short tail GTRs. You've got your passenger seat, your driver's seat. You know, I'm not going to say it's luxurious, but you wouldn't believe for a second that this car was designed and spent all of its life within an inch of its life. They're a very usable car on the road, which initially surprised me. The first Longtail that I ever purchased was 27R, which now resides in a fantastic collection in America. And when I first bought that car, I was speaking with Dean at the time on the phone, Dean Lanzante, and he said, you'll be surprised when you drive it if you haven't driven one. He said, they're fantastic on the road. And I was a little bit skeptical because I thought it is an out and out race car, and the 95 and 96 GTRs, they were basically road cars that were stripped and had a big rear wing bolted on. So those cars to drive compared to a road car isn't that dissimilar. But the 97 cars were an out and out race car, and I was skeptical about how nice they could be. But they are actually fantastic on the road. The sequential gearbox is really good, really smooth. You know, obviously you're sat in the center, and that sensation that you get from driving any F1, whether it's a road car, a short tail GTR, or a long tail GTR, is not comparable in any other car. You feel like you're going down the Mulsanne Straight when you're driving on the M1. And, you know, it really is a special experience. The other thing that I think everybody needs to wake up with regards to a long-tail GTR is that they only built 10 of these cars. And of the 10 cars, they reside in institutions, you know, BMW, McLaren, you know, some fantastic collections. You know, there's a few owners that actually own a road car, a short tail GTR, and a long tail GTR. And when you start to break that down, you'll say, well, how many cars will ever become available? And about 15 years ago, a short tail GTR was less valuable than a road car, which never made sense to anybody because a short tail GTR was a car that always done something, that was built to race, that won races. All of them was virtually successful, very successful. And a road car, you know, road cars are fantastic, but they never actually, in history, there will be many road cars, there's 64 road cars built, and with the exception, unless they have some really special, unique features, what did they actually do? Where these short-tail GTRs and these long-tail GTRs, they actually will go down in history. They won races, they won championships. And a GTR short-tail never deserved to be less money than a road car. And it, you know, the tables got turned, it overtook, and it's now way more valuable than a road car. Yet a long tail, this car we have priced at $15 million firm. It's $15 million, it's EU taxes paid, it's UK registered, it's got all of its, you know, and a very extensive spares package with it. And when you compare that to, say, the last 2 years, I've been selling road cars for a little bit north and a little bit south of $20 million for cars that have done, you know, 10, 12, 14,000 miles. For me, this car at $15 million feels like a fantastic opportunity for somebody. You know, people should always buy cars ultimately because they love them, because they want to own them. That's who I want to sell a car to. However, when you're spending this sort of money, it's hard not to have the corner of one eye a little bit on it as a possible investment or a safe place to put your money. And I think these cars are an absolute no-brainer. Now, we're not going to take her out on the road today. However, I am going to talk you through the startup process, which I thought you'd probably enjoy, and listen to her starting up because it's absolutely fantastic. So here on our right hand side we have the full control panel. So first things first is we turn the master on, and then we have the fuel pump. Fuel pump on, which you should be able to hear. In front of us, we have the onboard computer and some controls on the steering wheel. It's telling me to reset the fuel because I've just started the car up. We don't want to reset the fuel because if we did, we wouldn't know how much we've used, where at the moment we have a gauge at the top that's told us how much we've used. It's also got a flashing light saying alarm, which is asking me to acknowledge the message it is giving me on the computer. So I press alarm, that clears. It gives me the water temperature and it gives me the oil temperature. It tells me what gear I'm in, and then I will have a readout of how fast I'm going. So at the minute I'm obviously going 0. So the water temperature and oil temperature is showing 18 each. We're in neutral. Although it's a force of a habit in any car that I'm in, even when I know I'm in neutral, I have to depress the clutch just in case. And then we're going to try and start her.